It's a good thing I'm not nervous. Isn't it wonderful the way Grant does worship? Because it's not just worship, he's like preaching at the same time. So I want to thank Grant and the whole worship team for that. Amen. So I got up today, and I'm 70, almost going to be 71. And I tell myself it's like an old car, you know. There's always something, a new sound that shows up, or something else needs to be repaired. And I got up this morning and I was like, man, my back hurts a little more than normal, and my knees are a little more sore. And I'm thinking, well, why is that? Is it because I'm nervous to come preach? And I said, no. I'll tell you why it is. It's because last night I had a chance to go with these two little girls over here, who are my granddaughters, to a daddy-daughter dance. Now, I don't know if you've ever danced with a little girl that weighs 50 pounds, but it's hard. It's hard. It was like I got up this morning and, yeah, she's got the eyes rolling already. Yeah, Papa. Yeah, Papa. So I was talking to Pastor Dan a couple weeks ago, before he left on his trip, and we're just talking about stuff with the church, nothing serious. And he says, I've been thinking I don't have a guest speaker to come in and preach for me on the day that I'm gone in Africa. And I thought to myself, okay. He goes, been praying about it, and guess who names keeps on coming up? And I was at home, he was at his house. I started to physically back up into my chair. I said, no. He goes, no, I've been praying about it. He says, it's you, John, I want you to preach. And so how many of you think that's a good idea? You notice whose hand didn't go up? Okay. So I'm going to tell you how I feel. Jonah, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. Now, that's no reference to you guys. Okay. But Jonah got up and went into the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. That's how I felt. That's how I felt. Before I go any further, we got to release the kids. Leave the lights on. Well, can we turn those lights down a little bit? Okay, good. That would be helpful to me too. Oh, good. Thank you. Okay. So Jonah spoke pretty clearly on how I felt about it, right? I didn't want to run to Nineveh, but I did think, Tony, about running to Palermo's Pizzeria. I thought about that. So then Pastor Dan, as we're talking, I agreed, okay, I'm going to make the talk. And he says, I have another idea. Okay, Pastor, what's the other idea? I want you to tell the congregation about you. Well, I don't know how most men are, but I know how I am. When it comes to telling details about my life, I'm not really open about that kind of stuff. Tell my wife maybe, and some close friends, but I'm not going to get up in front of 100 people and start talking about all the stuff that happened to me in my life. But I said, okay. I said, oh boy. Is anyone really going to be interested in any of this? She keeps saying yes. Okay. So, I was born in 1955. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I was saved. I met Jesus in the summer of 1987. It was at a business seminar, and it was a weekend, and they typically had an optional Christian service on Sunday. You could either go home or go to the service. So I went to the service, and I sat next to a friend of mine. His name was Lyle Harmon. And they had an altar call, which I had no experience with, coming from a very, very traditional church. And the only experience I had with it was when my dad used to watch Billy Graham. So I knew a little bit about it. So when they did the altar call, Lyle Harmon went to me, like, get your behind up there. So I was being nudged a lot by the Holy Spirit to get up there and go. So I did. And that was good. I mean, some things changed. Not a lot changed for several years. I would call other people and myself a 1 foot in and a 1 foot out Christian, okay? But some things did change. I think the way I started to think about things, the way I looked at my family, how I interacted with people at work. I was in law enforcement. My language a little bit. But you know, I know a lot of people relate to this. God is patient, isn't he? He's what they call long-suffering. Yeah, he is. So I would actually say this prayer to him sometimes when I was having these moments where he's trying to nudge me to do things. I would say, Lord, I'm sorry. I'm a hard case. I'm a hard case. I'm stubborn, independent. I don't need to be told what to do. I know good enough for myself. My wife's over there shaking her head. She really wasn't. But. So now it's August of 1992. It's about 5 years later. I roll up into my driveway. I had built a house in Milford on a couple of acres. I was sitting in the driveway. I just returned from SWAT school. I thought I was some kind of tough guy. Extremely hard and physical school in Canton, Michigan. I'd rolled in, and I was sitting in my car in my driveway, and I was just looking around. It was in August, and it was warm, and I was sweaty because we had been running and exercising and shooting all day. I was in fatigues, and I was looking around, and I said to myself, I got the world just the way I like it, right? My kids are outside playing over here. My wife's in the house cooking dinner, and I'm in my car just thinking I'm, maybe the luckiest guy in the world. So that's 1992, I think, yeah. So in February, 6 months later, it was as if somebody had taken my entire family and myself, put it in a blender, and pushed high. So, what's that story? I was at work in February 13th, 1993. I was 37 years old. I was on patrol. Remember I told you I was in law enforcement. I was on patrol, and I got a call over the radio to come to the station ASAP. I was going north. This is cop talk now. I was going northbound on Greenfield, approaching 14 Mile Road. I made a quick U-turn in the middle of the intersection and rolled in to the station. So I get to the station, I get out of my police car, walk to the station, and a guy standing out front, a friend of mine, Dan, who was an ex-Detroit cop who now worked with me, a friend of mine, and he said, don't rush, but get dressed. You need to get in your personal car and drive to Huron Valley Hospital. Your wife was in an accident. I said, okay. I didn't really think much of that. I walked upstairs. Well, I kind of took 2 steps at a time going upstairs. And I changed in my civilian clothes, came downstairs, and was going to get in my car real quick, and Dan is standing there still. And he says, by the way, they're doing CPR on your wife at the scene. Now, if anyone has ever been in emergency service knows what that means. If you're doing CPR at somebody on the ground in the middle of February on the snowy ground, you know something bad happened, right? Now, to be got it. So, to be perfectly frank with you, I never remembered him saying that until about 3 weeks later. So I just drove over there in a hurry, but not in a great hurry. I got to the hospital, and they put me in a little office by myself. And well, I was sitting in the office, and this doctor came in. He was a big dude. He was about 6'5". And this is what he said to me. He said, "The blood was coming out faster than we can put it in, and she's gone." And I went, "What?" And he goes, she passed away. I said, of course I didn't believe that. I said, "I want to see her right now. I want to see her right now." He said, no. We got to get her cleaned up before you can see her. I said, and I looked him right in the eye. I said, "I'm going to see her right now." And he goes, "Okay, officer, So he opens the door, and outside the door was a Oakland County deputy, a woman that I knew, who happened to respond to the accident, and she was at the hospital. And she grabbed me by the arm, and she took me out into the emergency area, and the emergency area was simply curtains separating the patients. There were no rooms. People, I think, have seen that before. So it took me over to this curtain, opened the curtain, and I walked in, and there was a person on a bed there, and I turned around and walked out. I said, "That's not my wife." She was pretty beat up. I mean, so badly beat up I didn't recognize her. And Jane grabbed me by the arm, God bless her, and she goes, "Come on, let's go see your wife." It is her. And I walked up, and it was. Some of her hair was gone. She had crushed her skull. She had broken both arms and both legs, and she was, frankly, a mess. I could see why the doctor didn't want me to go in there. But then I got mad because we had talked about, the night before, my son and my youngest daughter, we took them out to the show to see Aladdin. You can imagine how long ago that was. And on the way back, she made some noise about going to, anybody remember Farmer Jack's? Farmer Jack's supermarket had this big sale, and buy one, get one free, and my wife was Greek and very frugal, and she wanted to go shopping at night, and I said, "No, why don't you just wait till I get home in the morning, we'll go." "Well, yeah, okay." Of course, she went anyway. So, there was one car off-the-road accident. We don't know what happened, but that's how it went down. So, after I spent a little time with my wife getting mad at her, they escorted me out to the waiting room, and then a person came in and said, "At this time, we have organ donation and stuff like that." And I said, "Sure, my wife would love that. Her eyes or whatever was available." And so I signed some forms, and away they went. And then my brother showed up, who lived not too far from there, and then my brother-in-law called, who was a Detroit cop himself. And he said, "Mom is on the way. Yaya is on the way." Yaya didn't speak English. And Yaya didn't read or write her own language. She came from the mountains of Greece.
And I thought, my goodness, if she finds out I gave away her eyes or her heart or something, because she was very suspicious, I just kind of freaked out. I was like, I can't do that. I had to call the person back in and tell them, no, I can't do that. And they, of course, they were understanding and all of that. But I just remember my mother-in-law coming over, and what a disaster that was. So the whole time I'm sitting in the waiting room, I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking one thing. How am I going to tell my kids? How am I going to tell my kids? Their mother's not coming home. So I was there, and then I went home around 4:30 in the morning. And, how am I going to tell my kids? Then I kind of figured it out. So I took the two older, I don't know if Chrissy remembers this. I took the two older ones, told them, they were 15 and 17. And then we're going to go tell the two little ones when they woke up. And they were 5 and 8. So that's what we did. My son, when I told him and Katie, he looked at me and he kind of smiled. He goes, Dad, you're just kidding. You're just kidding, Dad. And he ran downstairs. He opened the garage door, saw her car wasn't there, closed the door, got his trucks out, and started playing on the ground. That may have been the saddest thing I ever saw. So, I remember at the cemetery, I was standing there, and I think Maria and Christy were to my left, and the two little ones were to my right. And I think I was holding John's hand. It's over there. And there was this big dude, man. He looked just like John Wayne. His name was, I worked with him, his name was Sergeant Pete Lutz, right? Just even his name sounds tough, doesn't it? Pete Lutz. And he's bawling like a baby. Here we are, this little family, snowing out. It's cold. We're at a cemetery. Oh. So, where do I go from here? A year or so later, I meet Doreen. I meet her through a guy from work. I worked with Steve. Steve was her first cousin. She was looking for somebody. I wasn't necessarily, but I accepted the challenge. On our first date, when she came in the door, I said, man, I hit the mother load. But I honestly wasn't ready for that, but I did it anyway. I think I just needed somebody. I had my kids, and I was busy, and I just needed somebody to talk to. But anyway, fast forward a little bit. Doreen and I are married, and I'm going to tell you this. She's got 3 kids, and I got 4. You ever seen the movie Brady Bunch or the show Brady Bunch? Well, that's a fiction. There's nothing true about that show. There weren't a whole lot of smiles in our house, and there weren't a lot of getting along at our house. And then Doreen and I used to say that if anyone ever had a seminar on how to deal with as a blended family, we would be the perfect couple because we did absolutely every single thing wrong. So we already knew the mistakes. But anyway, through a friend of hers, we ended up going to Northridge Church. And we were the kind of couple that would come into church and sit in the back row, and as soon as the service felt like it was going to be over, we would sneak out so we wouldn't have to deal with anyone. Yeah. Then, a couple years later, they put out an invitation to go to Israel. Now, we didn't have any friends at Northridge. So we went to Israel, spent 10 days with 42 people, and came home with 42 friends. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Out of that bloomed, at Doreen's almost insistence, a Bible study. And that Bible study started with about 8 or 10 people. 8 or 10 gals, 8 or 10 women. As typical, the guys fizzled out after about a week. And the girls, let's have a party together. And so at Northridge Church, they said, well, you can't come here anymore because we got another class that's going to go in the room you're using. And Doreen goes, hey, gals, let's have it at our house. And she comes home and tells me, and I said, listen, Doreen, we're not having a party at our house every week. This is not a party house. Of course, we had it, and today there's 60 people that go there. So, how did I get here? So, Pastor Dan is at Harvest, and he wants to start a new church. So, one day, I retired in 2001, I think. I can't remember. 2021. And in the end of June, in July, I'm thinking to myself as July is going by real quickly, that what am I going to do with my life? I'm bored. I'd never golfed. I never fished or hunted. I didn't have time. I was working. So I remember sitting on the porch, and I get a phone call. Guy answers. I answer the phone. Hello? Yeah, my name is Dan. We got a mutual friend, and Larry Strom. Oh, okay, yeah. And he goes, I understand from Larry that you're doing a large Bible study at your church. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, we're looking for some place to house a small church for a couple of weeks to find a more permanent place. And I'm thinking to myself, why is Larry Strom talking to him about my house, Anyway, I said, Doreen's in the house doing what Doreen does, which is cooking or cleaning or always moving. And I'm sitting on the front porch drinking a cup of coffee, and I said to him, I could go in and ask my wife, but I already know the answer. The answer is yes, sure you can. So 70 people showed up at our house 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And I'm still kind of a 1 foot in and 1 foot out Christian, sort of. But at the end of those 3 weeks, 3 people were saved in our basement in our lower level. And Dan's preaching was just, I was hooked. That taking the Bible and just preaching out of the Bible, I just thought, man, this is the way it's supposed to be. So that's how I got here. That's what Dan wanted me to tell you. How did you get there? So it's all your fault that I'm standing up here because you're the ones that voted for me. So anyway, that's the story. You're welcome to ask me anything afterwards, or you want to clarify anything, or I'd be glad to ask or talk to you about it. But we're going to talk from the Bible now. Is that okay? Okay. We're going to go to 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Now, I was told I got to be out of here by 1 o'clock, and I said, okay. So family, and your family. I'm here today, and I could have preached from up here, but I don't want to preach from up there. I want to preach at the same level you're at. I'm among you, I'm not above you. And that whole idea matters a lot when we look at the passage we're going to look at. Peter begins this section in the same way that I feel. I'm a fellow elder. I'm a brother in Christ with my brothers and sisters in Christ. And we're all under the name and the authority of Christ, right? So, in verse 1, Peter writes, so I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ. So he's not pulling any rank here, right? He's not saying I'm above you. He's not speaking from a distance. He's speaking to them directly. He speaks like from a shared calling, like shared weakness, shared hope. And today, as one called to serve you as an elder, I want to open this whole 5 verses with you. and to ask you to do something. There's going to be several times. I don't know how many. I try to count them, and every time I, being 71 or almost, I get lost. I'm going to ask you to pray for us. Pray for me and the other elders and Pastor Dan several times. So I'm going to ask you to pray for me and for all the elders of this church, for Tony Foley and Russ King, Dan McGee, Keith Gudeman, and Mike Brackney, that we would live up to what God asks us to do. So what is our calling? Our calling is to shepherd the flock. So in verse 2, you see what Peter says about that. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight. So he's preaching from one of a more, like he's talking about an occupation, which is probably a real, like a tender way of, a tender job, and that job is shepherding, right? Shepherding is a tender thing when you're dealing with sheep. So shepherding is not, where did she go? Shepherding is not managing. It's not controlling. It's shepherding. A shepherd lives with his flock. He knows their paths, their fears, and their habits. I get it. He even smells like the sheep, doesn't he? You spend your life with sheep, you smell like sheep. But Peter is clear here. This is the flock of God. It's not my flock. It's not the other elders' flock. It's not really Dan's flock. The church does not belong to the elders. It belongs to God. We are under shepherds. We are here to care for the sheep just as Christ would. So if you look at that phrase in that verse 2, the part that says, that is among you, that matters too. Leadership in the church is meant to be in the present, in now. It's not distant. Elders are not called to hover over the church, to be helicopter elders, right? We are to walk with you. We're to listen and to pray with you, cry with you, and rejoice with you, right? Just like you guys cried with me this morning. So I'd ask you that you pray about something. That we as elders would never forget whose church this is. Pray that we would stay close to you and to our true shepherd. Not just administrate, but to care. So I once heard a pastor say, you can always tell when a shepherd has been replaced by a rancher. Now just listen to those two words. Shepherd, rancher. Mm-hmm. Ranchers drive cattle from behind. Shepherds walk in front of the sheep, guiding them tenderly. Cattle scatter under pressure. Sheep, they follow a voice that they trust. Pray that we would be shepherds who walk ahead just like Christ does. Not drivers cracking whips. And as we just said a minute ago, how do you know a good shepherd? He smells like a sheep, right? He's with them always. So how does God want us as leaders? How does he want us to serve? Verse 2, not under compulsion, but willingly as God would have you. So this kind of phrase kind of exposes the heart. God does not want reluctant leaders who serve out of guilt, serve out of pressure, or just mere duty. The word willingly carries with it an idea of eagerness, wanting to do it. So, all the elders will shake their head at this one. Yes, they'll shake their head like this. Elders will sometimes be tired. They'll feel the weight. They'll feel pressure. But if our service becomes some kind of joyless task that needs to be done, something is definitely not right. Correct? Wouldn't you agree? Of course. So pray that our hearts would stay soft and willing. That love for Christ, but not pressure, would keep us serving. Also in verse 2 it says, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. So this isn't shameful gain, this isn't about money. This is a different kind of gain. It's more about motivation. So shameful gain could include things like, I want to be an elder because, I'll be held in a higher esteem within the congregation. Or I'll have a chance to soothe my ego by controlling others. Or it validates me as a man or as a person. Or simply a need to feel important. That's why I want to be an elder. Peter says that the alternative to that is willingly and eagerness. So that's a readiness to serve Christ because Christ is worthy. And I would add, Christ is worthy, but we as elders are not. And he also, for us to remember, is that his people are precious. And that's how we have to look at it. So pray that we want nothing from you as a congregation other than your growth as a Christian. That's all we want. Verse 3. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the rest of the flock. So this might be the most searching line of all in these 5 verses. Domineering leadership. That's not necessarily a positive description, is it? That's not something you think about as in a positive way. So that domineering leadership means using fear or pressure or authority to get its way. Christ-like leadership is by example, by servanthood. The word example literally means a pattern that can be traced. Elders are called to live lives worth imitating. Not perfect people, but repentant people. Faithful people. So here's a great illustration. Remember when you were a child? Well, I don't know. Kids today, I don't know if they do this, but me as a child, which was the last century, remember tracing paper? Remember learning how to write letters? They had that real heavy block on a nice piece of paper, and then you put the trace paper over. And as a kid, you would follow, let's say it's a B, capital B. You would follow it because you could see it underneath the trace paper. And then afterwards, it would end, and then you would just keep on doing it. And by that time, you'd do pretty good at it, right? So that's what this example is. So that's the picture. So elders, we're not called to church to go where we wouldn't go. We're not calling you to do something that we wouldn't do. So if you would pray another prayer, Pray that our lives would be traceable, that you could look at us as an example. Verse 4, and this is about the chief shepherd. And then when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So this kind of lifts our eyes up, kind of figuratively, doesn't it? We look towards heaven with this. Elders are shepherds, but Jesus is a chief shepherd. We serve under his authority, and we look forward to his return. So the reward Peter is talking about, a crown of glory, if you look at the ancient times, the crowns they would give people, especially after an athletic event or something, it was made out of vines, out of vegetation, and would wear that as a reward for winning the race. But that crown, what Peter's talking about here, is that crown after a week or so starts to fade because the vegetation starts to die. Christ's reward doesn't fade. It's forever. And this is what we all work for, right? So this promise is not about ego. It's about endurance. It reminds weary leaders that faithfulness matters, even when no one else notices or could care less. Pray that we would live for Christ, and I love this phrase, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's all elders want. So now we're going to talk about you guys, the church family. Walking together, us and you, we're together, walking in humility. So if you look at verse 5, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility towards one another. So if you notice here, humility is not just for the leaders. It's for all of us. The phrase clothe yourself, that physically means putting something on, correctly? And I really like this example. It's like putting an apron on to cook. Because an apron is really a sign of serving, isn't it? Because we're going to cook and then we're going to serve food. So clothe yourselves with humility. Why humility? Because the word says that. God says this. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So that's kind of a sobering thing, isn't it? Pride actually puts us against God. If I'm prideful, it's John versus God. That's how he looks at it. Humility puts us under his grace. And I would add, under his protection too. So this reminds us that church life is not a power struggle, which it sometimes is, isn't it? At least it feels that way to me sometimes. It's actually a shared submission to Jesus. So if you would, another prayer. Pray that humility would mark our entire church, that elders and members alike would gladly, eagerly serve one another. I can see, somebody pushing somebody else out of the way trying to help serve somebody, right? So, here's the closing. I want you to hear my heart on this. This passage certainly doesn't make me feel impressive. This entire experience that I'm going through this morning does not make me feel impressive. It makes me feel inadequate, not worthy. So this calling that we all have is beautiful. but it's heavy. And I can't do it. Tony can't do it. Mike Brackney can't do it. Keith can't do it. Russ King can't do it. And Pastor Dan can't do it without your prayers. So I'm going to ask that we walk together. Elders and congregation, shepherds and sheep, so that our church becomes kind of a living example to other people. Peter envisioned this: a humble, Christ-centered family cared for by undersheriffs. This is my law enforcement background. Undersheriffs. Under-shepherds. Under-sheriffs, dude. Cared for by under-shepherds, all waiting together for the day when Christ returns. Thanks for listening.